Welcome to this deep dive into the world of persuasion and motivation. It's pretty fascinating stuff. You sent over some audio clips on influence, and I gotta say I'm hooked already.
Yeah.
We're gonna be uncovering some pretty unexpected connections, like how willpower is linked to those crunchy little radishes,
Okay.
what dancing monkeys can teach us about staying focused on goals,
Interesting.
and how to break free from that all too familiar desperation cycle.
And what I think is particularly interesting about this is that you're not just going to learn how to spot these techniques, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to equip you with the knowledge to actually use them ethically in your own life. It's like having a secret decoder ring for human behavior.
Okay, let's jump right in. One of the one of those intriguing ideas from these sources is the whole concept of power dynamics in persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was struck by the distinction between force and power.
Yeah.
One source uses the example of a bank robber,
Yeah.
right? And they said the gun itself, even without being fired, is enough to exert power. It made me realize that force is about compulsion, but power's a lot more subtle.
Precisely. It's like the difference between a command and a suggestion.
Ooh.
Like, think about the authority figures we encounter every day, right? A
Right.
police officer in uniform or a doctor with their stethoscope.
Right.
They don't need to force us to comply, right? Their perceived expertise and the weight of their roles, it just naturally exerts power.
It's almost like we're wired to respond to these symbols of authority without even thinking about it, you know?
You're exactly right. And understanding how we react to power, that's absolutely crucial if we want to use it ethically. And, the source actually breaks it down into three main responses.
Okay.
We got that automatic obedience,
Mm-hmm.
which is that knee-jerk reaction like stopping at a red light.
Right.
Then you've got thoughtful compliance,
Mm.
where you weigh the pros and cons before you go along. And then you have active resistance.
Yeah.
When we push back against that attempt to influence,
So knowing these responses can help us navigate situations where, maybe someone is trying to exert power over us, or even when we're trying to ethically influence others.
exactly. And this brings us to the four types of power that are often used in persuasion.
Okay.
And, it's not just about being the loudest voice in the room.
Right.
The source breaks it down into authority, respect, knowledge, and reward.
Okay.
And let's start with authority because, this one can be incredibly powerful, right?
Well, yeah, I immediately thought of that. I think it was the Milgram experiment,
Oh, yeah.
where participants were told to administer electric shocks, and even though they knew it was wrong,
Right.
they obeyed because the figure of authority told them to.
Exactly.
It really shows you how easily we can be swayed by those in a position of power.
Absolutely. But what's interesting is that, authority isn't always about an official title or position.
Right.
It can be conveyed in much more subtle ways. Think about, how we often defer to those in uniform, those with impressive job titles.
Right.
Or even just someone who, commands attention with their presence,
It makes you realize that authority isn't always earned. It can be projected and manipulated.
Precisely. Which is why it's crucial to be aware of these dynamics, right? Both when you encounter them and when you might be unknowingly wielding them yourself.
Okay, so moving on from authority, there's respect power, which to me seems to be more about, a person's character and their track record. It made me think about those mentors or leaders who don't necessarily have an official title, but their opinions carry a lot of weight just because they've earned that trust.
You've hit the nail on the head. Respect is earned through integrity, dependability, and a history of doing the right thing.
Yeah.
It's about consistency and living up to the values you espouse. Think of a religious leader or a mentor you admire. Their influence stems not from a position of authority, but from the respect they've cultivated over time.
That is a much more authentic, sustainable form of power, isn't it?
Absolutely. And now let's move on to knowledge power, which I think we can all relate to this. We naturally gravitate towards people who seem to have a deep understanding of a particular topic.
Yeah, think about those go-to friends who can explain anything, whether it's fixing a leaky faucet,
Right.
understanding cryptocurrency,
Right.
navigating a complex legal issue. It's like Their expertise makes us more likely to listen to their advice.
Exactly. And this source actually delves deeper into the types of knowledge power, right?
Okay.
You've got informational power, which is simply having the facts and the data. Then there's resource power,
Mm-hmm.
knowing the right people, having access to exclusive information, or being able to connect people with the resources they need.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, there's expertise power, which is that deep, specialized knowledge that comes from years of experience or study in a specific field.
It makes you realize that knowledge is powerful currency, especially in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and specialized.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of continuously learning and expanding our own knowledge base.
Okay, so the last type of power we're going to cover here is reward power,
Mm-hmm.
which seems pretty straightforward. Using incentives to motivate people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's offering bonuses at work, giving gifts, or even just praising someone for a job well done.
Yeah, but it's not always as simple as it seems,
Mm-hmm.
One of the sources actually highlighted this really fascinating study about external rewards that, well, it really made me think.
Okay.
They found that paying people to solve puzzles actually made them less likely to enjoy doing puzzles in their free time.
Really?
It's almost as if the external reward diminished their intrinsic motivation.
Interesting. So it seems like there's a delicate balance between using rewards effectively
Hmm.
and maybe unintentionally undermining someone's internal drive.
Precisely. And this is particularly relevant, when you're trying to motivate yourself or others for the long haul.
Right.
It's not just about those quick fixes or those short-term gains. It's about fostering a genuine passion for the task at hand.
That's a great segue into the next section, which is all about those elusive characteristics of influential people.
Right.
And one source made a really important distinction between persuasion and influence.
Yes.
Persuasion being more about those actions, the techniques, and influence being more about who you are as a person.
It's a subtle but crucial difference. Like, think about it this way. A bossy coworker who tries to push their ideas on you versus a respected mentor who inspires you to want to learn and grow.
Okay.
One pushes you to do things, the other makes you want to do them.
I love that. That's such a great analogy.
Right.
So what are some of these characteristics that make someone truly influential?
Well, this source actually lists 7,
Okay.
but they all work together to kind of create this magnetic presence.
Okay.
And the first one is passion. I think we can all agree this one is pretty contagious.
Yeah. You know how when someone's really excited about something, it's almost impossible not to get caught up in their enthusiasm? Think about that friend who's obsessed with their new hobby. They could talk about it for hours and make it sound fascinating, even if you never thought you'd be interested in something like that.
That's passion in action, right? And in the world of influence, it's often that spark,
Yeah.
that separates those who simply go through the motions from those who truly captivate and inspire.
Passion is definitely important, but I've always thought about charisma as being this almost magical quality, like you're either born with it or you're not.
I used to think that way too. But, this source actually argues that charisma is more about learned behaviors than innate charm.
Interesting.
It's about projecting confidence, honing your communication skills, even paying attention to your appearance and how you carry yourself.
So it's not about being someone you're not. It's about bringing your best self to the table.
Exactly. Think about those public speakers or leaders who just seem to effortlessly command a room. It's often not about some inherent magnetism. It's about the deliberate choices they've made to cultivate their presence.
That's a good point. The next characteristic they highlight is optimism, which, let's be honest, can be tough to maintain when things aren't going your way.
Right. Right. But the source actually quotes Helen Keller here, who says, no pessimist ever discovered the secrets of the stars.
Oh, I love that.
And it's such a powerful reminder that, even in the face of challenges, maintaining that positive outlook can make all the difference.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between, blind optimism and what they call educated optimism, which is about acknowledging those obstacles, but choosing to focus on the possibilities.
Precisely. It's not about being naive. It's about approaching situations with that solution-oriented mindset.
Yeah. The next characteristic on the list is attitude. And this source makes a point that really resonated with me. They said your attitude, it's a choice. We get to decide how we show up in the world every single day.
And influential people, well, they tend to choose a positive attitude, even when things are tough. It's not about ignoring the negative, but it's about choosing how you respond to it. And remember, your attitude, it's contagious. So make sure you're spreading the kind that uplifts and inspires.
Next up is empathy, Which, well, this one seems pretty straightforward. It's about understanding and sharing the feelings of others.
Yes, but this source actually encourages us to go beyond just going through the motions.
Okay.
True empathy is about actively stepping into someone else's shoes, really seeing the world from their perspective and making a genuine effort to understand their motivations, their fears, and their aspirations.
Yeah, it's about going beyond those surface-level interactions and really making that deeper connection.
Exactly.
And research has even shown that, empathetic people tend to have higher self-esteem and a greater sense of social responsibility.
It's a win-win, right?
Yeah. Okay, so the next characteristic here is vision. Think about those leaders who have this really crystal clear sense of, well, of where they're going, how to get there. They paint a picture of the future that just inspires people to follow them.
And the source actually quotes Walt Disney here. He said, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood."
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder that having that bold, ambitious vision, it's essential, right? Both for inspiring yourself and others.
It's about seeing that big picture
Yeah.
and then breaking it down into those actionable steps.
Right.
And speaking of taking action, that brings us to the last characteristic on this list, which is self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't believe in yourself, how can you inspire others to believe in you?
Yeah.
It's about recognizing your own worth and those unique strengths that you bring to the table.
And the source actually connects this back to charisma, explaining that when you believe in yourself, you project a confidence that draws people in and makes them more receptive to your ideas.
I love how all these characteristics just seem to work together. It's like they create this synergistic effect that makes someone truly influential.
You're right. It's not about mastering one characteristic in isolation. It's about weaving them all together to create this compelling and authentic presence.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the different types of power,
Mm-hmm.
the responses they evoke, even those kind of elusive characteristics of influential people. But where do we go from here?
Well, now that we have a better understanding of the fundamentals, right, we can start to explore some specific techniques and strategies for putting this knowledge into action. Are you ready to dive into some real-world examples and practical tips?
I'm all ears. Let's get practical.
Perfect. So before we move on, let's take a moment to connect all this back to you. Think about your own goals, your aspirations, the things you want to achieve. How might understanding these power dynamics and characteristics of influence, how might they help you on your journey?
That's a great question. It actually makes me wonder, what about those darker tactics of persuasion? The source mentioned those.
That's a great point. Before we move on to applying these principles, I think it's important to be aware of some of the less ethical ways that persuasion can be used.
So we're talking about manipulation here, the stuff we need to watch out for.
Exactly. And, understanding these darker tactics, it's just as important as understanding the more ethical approaches. It's like knowing how to defend yourself, right?
Right.
Doesn't mean you're going to attack anyone, but it gives you a sense of security, that awareness.
So give me some examples. What are some of these dark tactics that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, one common tactic is creating a sense of urgency. Think about those limited time offers you see online or those only 2 left in stock messages, right?
Right.
They're designed to pressure you into making a quick decision
Right.
before you've really had a chance to think things through.
Oh my gosh, I totally fall for that stuff all the time. Especially when they have that little countdown timer ticking away.
Oh, yeah.
Sends me to a frenzy.
It plays on our fear of missing out. We're hardwired to avoid loss. And these tactics, well, they exploit that. Another common tactic is using loaded language and emotional appeals
Right.
to bypass that rational part of our brains. Think about those political ads that, try to scare you into voting a certain way, or those charity commercials with that sad music and those heart-wrenching images.
Ugh, I know exactly what you mean. They tug at your heartstrings, but then you step back and you're like, wait a minute, what are they doing here? It feels really manipulative.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that these tactics, they're often designed to trigger that emotional response rather than engage in a reasoned discussion.
Right.
And then you have social proof, which is basically the everybody's doing it approach.
Like those 9 out of 10 dentists
Yeah.
recommend this toothpaste claims or online reviews that are suspiciously all 5 stars.
Exactly. They're trying to create this sense of consensus, even if it's manufactured. But just because something is popular, well, that doesn't mean it's the best choice.
It seems like you really have to be extra careful these days with so much information flying around and everyone just vying for our attention.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is your best defense here. Question everything, do your own research, and don't be afraid to challenge those claims that sound too good to be true.
So it's about becoming more savvy consumers of information and not just taking everything at face value.
You got it. Now, with all this in mind, I think we're ready to explore the fascinating world of motivation, both understanding our own internal drives and how to ethically motivate others.
I am so ready to uncover the secrets of motivation. Let's dive in.
Great. So let's start by dispelling a common myth that motivation is all about setting those big goals and chasing those elusive dreams. It's actually much more nuanced than that.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
This source emphasizes that motivation isn't just about those grand aspirations, right? It's about the choices we make every single day. It's about those seemingly small decisions, the habits we cultivate, the actions we take, even when we don't feel like it.
So it's not about waiting for motivation to strike. It's about creating it through that consistent action.
Exactly. And that brings us to two major pitfalls that can really sabotage our motivation.
Okay.
A negative mindset and surrounding ourselves with unsupportive people.
Yeah, I think we've all encountered those energy vampires.
Oh, yeah.
Just drain the life out of you.
Ah.
It makes it so much harder to stay motivated.
Yeah, and, while some negativity can be healthy,
Right.
Keeps us grounded, but what this source is talking about is that pervasive pessimism that can really hold us back. And they use this really powerful analogy of an elephant that's been chained up since it was a baby.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. Even when the elephant grows up and is strong enough to break free, it doesn't even try, right?
Dang.
Because it's learned to be helpless.
I mean,
That's a powerful image of how those limiting beliefs can hold us back.
precisely. And this learned helplessness, well, it can manifest in so many areas of our lives, from our careers to our relationships.
It's a good reminder that we need to be mindful of the stories we tell ourselves and the people we surround ourselves with.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another fascinating concept, delayed gratification. You've probably heard of the classic marshmallow test, where researchers, they gave these children a choice. One marshmallow now or two if they could wait.
I remember reading about that. It's amazing how predictive those results were.
Yeah.
The kids who were able to delay gratification, they ended up being more successful later in life.
Exactly. It's this powerful demonstration of the connection between self-control, delayed gratification, and long-term success.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of cultivating those skills, even if it means resisting those tempting immediate rewards.
Well, it's not always easy to resist that instant gratification, especially in a world that just bombards us with temptations at every turn.
It's a constant battle, for sure. But this source argues that willpower is like a muscle.
Okay.
The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets.
Right.
And there are actually techniques we can use to replenish our willpower reserves, like taking breaks, reviewing our goals, or even just doing something kind for someone else.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So it's not about having superhuman willpower. It's about being strategic and understanding how to manage this finite resource.
Exactly. Now, even with the best willpower in the world, there's another obstacle that can really trip us up, the desperation cycle.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier, so tell me more. What exactly is the desperation cycle?
Okay, so think about that frantic scramble to lose weight before, a big event, like a wedding or a reunion.
Okay.
You go all in, restrict your calories, you work out like crazy, and maybe you even see some initial results.
Right.
But as soon as that event's over, well, you fall right back into those old habits.
Oh, gosh, I've been there so many times. Yeah. So frustrating.
Yeah, and the source, well, they explain that it's because we often approach these goals from a place of desperation.
Okay.
This desire to avoid discomfort or escape a negative situation.
So we're not actually motivated by the positive outcome, but rather maybe the fear or the avoidance?
Often, yes. And because that motivation is rooted in that negativity, it's not sustainable, right? So as soon as that pressure is off, well, we revert back to our comfort zones, even if those zones aren't really serving us.
So how do we break free from this desperation cycle? And, how do we tap into a more sustainable source of motivation?
That's a great question. And, this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it actually ties into how we motivate others as well.
I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So one of the sources introduces Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's this pyramid that kind of shows those different levels of human needs.
Oh, I've heard of this. It starts with those basic needs at the bottom, like food, water, and shelter, and then it moves up to those more complex needs, like belonging, esteem, and self-actualization.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here is that you can't effectively motivate someone if you don't understand where they are on that hierarchy.
So, like, offering a promotion to someone struggling to put food on the table, probably not going to be that effective.
You got it. You have to address those basic needs first.
It's like trying to build a roof on a house before you've laid the foundation.
Exactly. Now, this understanding of human needs, well, it leads us to this crucial distinction. The difference between inspiration and desperation as motivators.
So are you saying that we should avoid setting goals based on what we don't want to happen?
Well, it's not necessarily about avoiding those goals altogether because sometimes they can be powerful motivators in the short term.
Right.
But the key is to recognize their limitations and to strive for a more sustainable source of motivation, inspiration.
Okay. So how do we shift from that desperation to a more inspiring approach?
Well, that's where understanding this concept called the Persuasion Institute's motivation system comes in.
Okay.
It breaks down motivation into 4 quadrants,
Okay.
ranging from external desperation to internal inspiration.
4 quadrants. Okay, this sounds fascinating. Tell me more.
All right, so it all starts with understanding the difference between external motivation, which is driven by factors outside ourselves, like those rewards, punishments, or social pressure,
Mhm.
and internal motivation, which comes from within. That sense of purpose, a passion for a particular subject, a desire for growth.
So external motivation is doing something because you have to, and internal motivation is doing something because you want to.
You got it. And within each of these categories, there's this spectrum, right, of desperation
Oh.
and inspiration. So, someone might be externally motivated by desperation, like working a job they hate just to pay the bills.
I think we've all been there at some point.
Right. Or they might be externally motivated by inspiration, like training for a marathon to raise money for a charity they believe in.
Okay, so understanding where we fall on that spectrum can help us make more conscious choices about, well, uh, about how we approach our goals and how we try to motivate others.
Absolutely. And you know what? This is where this source shares this fascinating study
Okay.
about these college students learning neurophysiology. Okay, so they divided these students into 2 groups, right? One group was told that they needed to master the material to get a good grades, right? Purely external motivator. The other group was told that they were learning the material to help develop new therapies for people with neurological disorders, really tapping into that internal inspiration.
So I'm guessing that the second group, the one focused on helping others, they were more engaged and performed better.
You're spot on. The students who were motivated by that sense of purpose and that desire to make a difference, they far outperformed the group that was just focused solely on those grades.
It really shows the power of connecting with the deeper why, doesn't it?
Oh, precisely. And to help us understand the why behind our own motivation and the motivations of others, this source actually provides a practical tool called the motivation formula.
I love a good formula.
Yeah.
So what is this motivation formula and how can we use it?
Well, it's essentially a framework, right, for analyzing both your own drive and the drive of those around you.
Okay.
And it prompts you to ask these key questions. What does this person truly want? What are their fears? What obstacles are they facing? And what resources or support do they need to succeed?
It's like a detective's toolkit for understanding what makes people tick.
Exactly. Now, before we dive deeper into this motivation formula and, explore some practical strategies for cultivating motivation, let's just pause for a moment and think about your most important goal right now. What is it that you're striving for?
That's a great question. Well, I'm really working on mentioning a goal that's relevant to the listener's interests or situation based on the sources provided right now.
Fantastic. Now, as we continue this deep dive, keep that goal in mind. We're going to explore how you can apply these principles of motivation and persuasion to achieve it.
I am ready. Let's do this.
All right, so you're working on the listener's goal mentioned in part 1. That's fantastic. As we kind of continue unpacking these concepts of motivation and persuasion, I think you'll find some really valuable tools here to help you achieve that. One of the sources introduced this concept called life alignment. And it really struck me as a really powerful way to look at how different areas of our lives impact, our overall motivation.
Life alignment. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Well, think of it like a diversified investment portfolio.
Okay.
We need to have balance across those different areas for optimal well-being, just like a diversified portfolio helps us mitigate risk.
Right.
And this source lists 6 key areas: physical health, financial well-being, relationships, emotional state, spiritual connection, and intellectual growth. And they argue that when these areas are in harmony, we have more energy and focus to pursue our goals. But if one area is significantly out of balance, it can negatively impact all the others.
That makes a lot of sense. Like if you're constantly stressed about finances, for example, it's going to be much harder to focus on your relationships or, your personal growth.
You got it. It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to take care of yourself holistically to be truly effective in any area of life.
So how do we apply this life alignment concept to motivation?
Well, it starts with awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take a moment to reflect on those 6 areas in your own life. Are there any that feel out of balance? Areas where you might be neglecting your needs.
Yeah, that's a great question to consider. It makes me think about how sometimes we get so caught up in one area like our careers that we kind of neglect these other equally important areas.
Exactly. And that imbalance can lead to burnout, resentment, and, well, a lack of motivation. So by striving for this life alignment, you're creating a more solid foundation for achieving your goals.
It's like taking care of the engine of your car.
Yeah.
You can't expect it to perform well if you're not giving it the fuel and the maintenance it needs.
That's a great analogy. Now, let's kind of shift gears here and explore another fascinating concept that ties directly into motivation. The fable of the dancing monkeys.
Oh, yes. You mentioned this earlier. I'm curious to hear more about these monkeys.
Okay, so imagine this.
Yeah.
A king, right? He has these monkeys, and they're trained to dance and perform, for his entertainment.
Okay.
So they're dressed up in these elaborate costumes, they're wearing masks, and they've rehearsed this elaborate routine for the entire court. It's a spectacle. But during the performance, someone in the audience throws a handful of candy onto the stage.
Oh, no. I bet those monkeys can't resist that.
You're right. They completely abandon their carefully rehearsed routine. They rip off their costumes, their masks, and they just devolve into this chaotic scramble for the candy. They lose all focus, all discipline.
It's amazing how such a small distraction
Mhm.
can completely derail even the most well-trained performers.
Right, and that's precisely the point the source is making, right? Those monkeys represent that part of us that craves instant gratification, that gets seduced by those shiny objects, even if it means sacrificing those long-term goals.
So we're all those dancing monkeys in a way. Like we have our goals, our aspirations, but then life throws these tempting distractions our way and, we can so easily lose sight of what we're working toward.
Exactly. And just like those monkeys, we can end up abandoning those carefully laid plans, just in pursuit of those quick hits of pleasure or satisfaction. It's the instant gratification trap.
And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. It's like we're on autopilot, just reacting to those shiny objects instead of making those conscious choices that actually align with our goals.
Oh, it's so easy to fall into that trap, especially in today's world, where those distractions are just everywhere.
So how do we break free from this cycle?
Yeah.
How do we become more aware of those distractions and make choices that actually support our long-term vision?
Well, the source actually provides some some pretty practical strategies for avoiding those candy-obsessed monkey moments in our own lives.
Okay.
And it all starts with clarity.
Okay.
You have to be crystal clear on what your goals are, why they are important to you, and how achieving them will positively impact your life.
So it's not enough to just have a vague idea of what you want, right?
Great.
You have to really define it, understand that why behind it, and connect with that emotional significance of achieving it.
Exactly. And it can be helpful to, actually write down your goals, create a vision board, or just find ways to make them more tangible and real. The more vivid and compelling your vision is, the less likely you are to be swayed by those distractions.
It's like having a compass that just keeps pointing you back in the right direction.
Yeah.
So clarity is key. What other strategies can we use to kind of stay focused?
Well, another powerful tool is breaking down those large, daunting goals into, smaller, more manageable steps. When you're feeling overwhelmed, remember that you don't have to tackle everything at once. Focus on what you can do today and just take those consistent actions.
I found that to be so helpful in my own life. It just feels less overwhelming, more empowering when I focus on taking those smaller steps consistently.
Exactly. Remember, those small wins, they build momentum, they keep you moving forward, and don't underestimate the power of celebrating those wins.
It's like giving yourself a pat on the back for, all the hard work you're putting in. And it kind of reinforces that positive cycle of effort and reward.
You got it. Now, another key strategy for staying focused is accountability.
Okay.
Share your goals with someone supportive, a friend, a mentor, a coach, someone who will cheer you on and hold you accountable.
It's like having your own personal cheering section.
Mm,
And sometimes just knowing that someone else is aware of your goals and checking in on your progress can be enough to, keep you motivated.
it's true. That external support can make all the difference. And remember, progress over perfection. Don't let the fear of not doing something perfectly hold you back from taking action.
Oh, that's a big one for me. I tend to get stuck in that perfectionist trap, which, well, it often leads to procrastination and inaction.
I think we've all been there. But the source reminds us that those imperfect actions, those baby steps, they can lead to incredible progress over time. So just embrace the messiness of the process and just keep moving forward.
Just start. That's such great advice. Now, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the motivation download. What exactly is this download and how can we access it?
Yes, the motivation download. Think of it less as a literal file you download and more like a metaphorical toolkit that helps you internalize these principles of motivation and make them a part of your daily life.
So it's about taking all this amazing information and actually putting it into practice.
Exactly. It's about rewiring your thinking, building those habits, and becoming the kind of person who shows up consistently, even when it's tough, even when you don't feel like it.
It's about cultivating that inner drive that propels us forward rather than relying on those external factors to motivate us.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. The source emphasizes that, there will be setbacks, challenges, moments when you feel like giving up. I mean, we're all human, and those fluctuations, well, they're perfectly normal.
So it's not about being perfect, but rather, having the resilience to bounce back from those setbacks and just keep moving forward.
Precisely. And this is where having those strategies in place, like that clarity, that accountability, celebrating those small wins, it becomes so important. They help you weather those storms and stay committed to your vision.
It's like having a toolkit for those inevitable moments of self-doubt or discouragement. And knowing that those moments are normal and that we have those tools to navigate them, well, that can be incredibly empowering.
You're absolutely right. Now, before we wrap up this section, I want to circle back to those darker tactics of persuasion that we talked about earlier. While we've been focusing on the ethical and empowering ways to influence others, well, it's just as important to be aware of those manipulative tactics that, some people might use.
Yeah, it's like learning how to defend yourself,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't mean you're going to attack anyone, but it gives you that sense of security, that awareness.
Exactly. So let's kind of revisit some of those tactics and explore how to recognize them in those real life situations.
Great. I'm ready to sharpen my manipulation detection skills.
Perfect. So let's start with that tactic of creating a sense of urgency. Remember those limited time offers and, only 2 left in stock messages that we talked about?
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely guilty of falling for those. It's like my rational brain just goes out the window when I see that countdown timer ticking away.
It's a powerful psychological trigger, playing on our fear of missing out. And it's become even more prevalent with online shopping and those flash sales that just, create this sense of scarcity and urgency.
So how do we avoid falling for this trap?
Well, first, it's about recognizing the tactic, right?
Right.
Just take a moment to pause and question that sense of urgency. Is it real or is it manufactured?
Ask yourself, do I really need this right now, or am I being pressured into making this, hasty decision?
Exactly. And remember, most of the time, there's no real rush. You can always come back to it later if you decide it's something you truly want or need.
That's great advice. Now, what about those loaded language and emotional appeals? It can be so hard to stay objective when someone's tugging at your heartstrings or playing on your fears.
It's true. And, these tactics, they're often designed to kind of bypass our rational thinking and just trigger an emotional response. Think about those political ads that use fear-mongering or those charity commercials that exploit our empathy.
Right. It's like they're trying to manipulate us into making a decision based on emotion rather than logic.
Precisely. And while emotions are a powerful driver of human behavior, well, it's important to be aware of when they're being used to manipulate us.
So what can we do to protect ourselves from these tactics?
Again, it starts with awareness. Just pay attention to the language being used. Are there any emotionally charged words or phrases that are designed to, elicit a strong reaction? Are they presenting facts or opinions? Are they appealing to your logic or to your emotions?
It's about engaging our critical thinking skills and not letting those emotional appeals cloud our judgment.
Exactly. Now, the last tactic we'll cover here is social proof, which is all about using the power of consensus
Right.
to influence our decisions.
Like those claims that, 9 out of 10 dentists recommend a certain toothpaste, or those online reviews that are suspiciously all 5 stars.
Right. They're trying to create this sense that, well, everyone's doing it, so you should too. But just because something is popular, that doesn't mean it's the best choice for you.
So how do we avoid falling for this trap?
It's about being discerning and questioning those claims of consensus.
Okay.
Ask yourself, is this information credible? Are these reviews authentic? Is this product or service truly the bad fit for my needs? Or am I just being swayed by the crowd?
It's about doing your own research and making decisions that are, that are aligned with your own values and goals,
Right.
rather than blindly following the herd.
You've got it. Now, before we move on to the next section, I want to leave you with with a thought-provoking question to consider. Think about a time when you were persuaded by someone using one of these darker tactics.
Okay.
What happened? How did it feel?
That's a great question. And it makes me realize that understanding these tactics not only helps us protect ourselves from manipulation, but it also helps us make more ethical choices, when we're trying to influence others.
Absolutely. The more aware we are of these dynamics, the more likely we are to use our influence for good.
I'm ready to dive deeper into that idea of using our influence ethically and effectively. Let's move on. We've talked about the importance of understanding those different motivational styles,
Right.
From that external desperation to internal inspiration.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating how understanding where someone falls on that spectrum can completely change how we approach, motivating them.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of this example from one of the sources about this company struggling to motivate its employees.
Okay.
They had tried all the usual tactics, bonuses, incentives, even threats.
Right.
But nothing seemed to work.
It sounds like they were stuck in that external desperation quadrant, relying on those outside forces to try and get results.
Exactly. But then they tried something completely different.
Hi.
They decided to bring in local artists and musicians to give workshops and performances for the employees.
Wait a minute. Artists and musicians. That's a pretty unconventional approach to boosting employee motivation.
Yeah. It might seem unusual, but think about it. This wasn't about forcing them to work harder.
Right.
It was about connecting them with something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
Something that could really spark, their creativity and passion.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like they were trying to shift those employees from that external desperation to maybe a bit more internal inspiration.
Exactly. And the results, they were incredible.
Yeah.
The employees were so energized by these experiences that it actually spilled over into their work. They were more engaged, more creative, and ultimately, more productive.
That's a great example of how sometimes the most effective approach to motivation is to really tap into those intrinsic motivators.
Yeah.
Those things that just light people up from the inside out.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture, right? Where people feel valued, inspired, and empowered to do their best work.
Yeah.
And, that brings us back to the importance of trust in any persuasive interaction.
Yeah, you've mentioned trust a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so crucial in this whole context of persuasion and influence?
Well, think about it this way. None of the techniques or strategies that we've discussed, they're not going to work if people don't trust you, right?
Right.
It's the foundation of any successful relationship, whether it's personal or professional.
It's like that old saying, you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. Sooner or later, people will see through those who are, inauthentic or manipulative.
Exactly. People can spot a phony a mile away and, if you're not genuine, if you're not coming from a place of integrity, it'll eventually catch up with you.
So how do we cultivate that trust?
Right.
What are some tangible steps we can take to make ourselves more trustworthy in the eyes of others?
So one of the sources actually outlines a few key principles, right, for building trust.
Okay.
And first and foremost, it's about being reliable and keeping your promises.
Right.
If you say you're going to do something, do it.
That seems pretty basic, but I think we've all encountered those people who are, all talk and no action.
Oh, yeah.
And it really erodes trust when you can't count on someone to follow through.
Absolutely. And it's not just about those big commitments, right?
Yeah.
It's about those everyday interactions, those small promises we make.
Right.
Consistency is key.
Yeah.
Another important principle is transparency.
Yeah.
Be honest about your intentions and your motivations.
Yeah.
Don't try to hide things or manipulate people behind their backs.
So it's about being upfront and authentic, even when it's, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable.
You're exactly right. People appreciate honesty, even if it's not what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And finally, trust is built through empathy. Show that you care about, about the other person's perspective, their feelings, their needs.
It goes back to that active listening we talked about earlier. Really hearing what the other person is saying, making them feel understood.
Yeah.
And acknowledging their perspective,
Right.
even if you don't necessarily agree with it.
Yes. When people feel like you genuinely care about them, they're much more likely to trust you.
Right.
It all comes down to building those strong, authentic relationships.
And those relationships, well, those are the foundation of true influence. Well, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive into persuasion and motivation. It's, it's been an incredible journey unpacking these concepts and exploring how we can use them to really create positive change in our own lives and in the lives of others.
It really has. And, as we wrap things up, I want to encourage you to continue this exploration.
Yeah.
Don't just, file away this information.
Right.
Put it into practice. Experiment with these techniques. Observe how they work in your own life and keep refining your approach.
It's an ongoing journey, right, of self-discovery and growth.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder.
Okay.
So think about those people in your life who you find truly influential.
Okay.
What is it about them that draws you in? What qualities do they embody that make you want to listen to them, to trust them, and to follow their lead?
And once you've identified those qualities, ask yourself, how can I cultivate those same qualities in myself?
Because you know what? We all have the potential to be influential.
Yeah.
It's not about, having some magical gift or a charismatic personality.
Right?
It's about developing those skills, nurturing those relationships, and using our influence for good.
So go out there and make your influence felt. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.